Hi, everyone. I hope that you're enjoying your opening week of Venture Shakespeare. I am Karen Harker. I'm one of Kirsten's friends and was starting my PhD when Kirsten was here in Stratford-upon-Avon, where I'm videoing now. When she was doing her MA, I was just starting my PhD. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm in my third year of my PhD, and my focus is 19th century performance of Shakespeare. So not looking at original performances and not looking at current performances, but somewhere in between in the 1800s. And the thing that I'm most interested in is incidental music, or the music that's used within production. And so part of my work is going into archives and libraries and digging through old boxes and trying to find music that was used in these productions and then bringing some of that to life through digital reconstruction. Today, what I'm going to talk to you about in relation to Twelfth Night is the musicality of this play. So today we're going to talk a little bit about musical language and allusions in the play, the earliest versions of the songs, at least that we know of and that have survived, and the person that sung these songs on Shakespeare's stage in 1602. Also, we're going to talk about the role of music in this play and the way that music works thematically in this play, as well as practically in terms of performance, but also thematically why music is important in Twelfth Night. And then we're also going to at least consider questions about, why is music important in theater in general, in comedy in general, and tragedy in general. So I've made a little bit of a handout for you, which will kind of go along with the things that I'm going to talk about today. So if you want to, while I'm talking, you can feel free to follow along. I think at the end of all of this, if you end up having any questions, I'll be available for a live FaceTime or Skype or something equivalent. Right, so the opening quote that I gave you on your handout, which I have here, that's what I'm looking at, is from Keir Alam, who is the editor of the Arden 3 edition, which I believe everyone has. And the quote states, "Music is not a decorative addition to Twelfth Night, but an essential part of the play's dramatic economy." And so that is the quote that really I want you to think about today as I'm talking, is what does it mean really by the play's dramatic economy? And how is music operating not just as something that's decorative or nice, but that's something that is essential to the performance of the play? Without music, we could not perform this play. That's something to think about. So the first thing that I want to start out with are, where do we see music come up in this play? Some of this is quite obvious. Some of it maybe not so much. So Twelfth Night is the only play of Shakespeare's that begins and ends with music, which I think is pretty significant. There is sort of this unspoken law of Shakespeare that the opening scene typically gives us a clue as to what is this play going to be about. In this case, our opening scene, of course, starts with the extremely famous line, "If music be the food of love, play on." So actually the first noun of the play is music, if music, right? So we know from that moment forward that music is going to be underscoring thematically and practically throughout this entire play. The play also ends with music in Feste's epilogue. He sings the epilogue, and it is a song that, as we will discuss, also there is a version of performed by the Fool as well in King Lear, but that would have been later than Twelfth Night, so it's the first time it's performed on the stage. There are 7 songs sung in Twelfth Night. That is more than any other Shakespeare play as well. And then there are 2 other ballads that are mentioned, or at least the first line, at least from what we can tell dramatically, is sung, but then they're dropped. So actually we have references to 9 contemporary musical pieces within this play, which is really huge, even in some of Shakespeare's other most musical plays. This really goes even beyond that. singing and music is important because it also contributes to the plot of the play. So I don't know how well you know the play at this point, but the revenge plot against Malvolio that is started up by Maria and Sir Toby Belch, that is not possible without music, because what they're responding to is when Malvolio interrupts their noisy revels in the middle of the night. And then they get upset at Malvolio, and that's why they choose to retaliate. So without music, also the plot of this play just simply couldn't advance. So on your handout, I've given you some places in the text that mention things related to music. So of course, I've already mentioned the opening line. If we look at Act 2, Scene 4, that is very much an echo of 1-1, the first scene in the play. And it begins again with Orsino, and he says, "Give me some music." So a little bit more demonstrative in the way that he asks for his music, but also very reflective of that scene. Also in the second act, fourth scene, we have references to that old and antic song and the light airs of these brisk and giddy-paced times. So giddy-paced also could be considered a musical or at least rhythmic term there. And then, "Do you make an alehouse of my lady's house, that ye squeak out your cosier's catches?" That means cobbler's catches. So that means the songs that cobblers, shoemakers would have sung. It was quite common, if you kind of think of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and they sing while they're working. It's quite common for certain trades during this time to have their own types of music that they would sing as they worked to. We also have references to the triplets, the tripping measure, lullabies. So although you may not know what these words mean, and I on purpose didn't write out what the words mean, because if you look in your edition, in the footnotes, it has better definitions than what I would give you, because a scholar with a PhD already has written those notes. And so what I would encourage you to do is, after watching this video, going and looking up, what does triplex mean? What does tripping measure mean? But to give you a little bit of that, some of these songs are very slow, very soft tunes. Some of them are very fast, often dance tunes. And so we have sort of a juxtaposition, sort of a dichotomy being sort of fleshed out in these terms as we look at them, which show us that there's two different types of rhythm or tempo going on in the play itself, which I'll get to a little bit more in a minute. There's also another really significant musical reference that on the surface, unless you really know your Greek mythology, it doesn't seem like a musical reference. So it's in Act 1, Scene 2. It's as Viola has washed ashore in Illyria, and she's talking to the captain, and the captain is relating to her what he saw in terms of her brother, Sebastian. And he says, "Where like Arion on the dolphin's back, I saw him," meaning Sebastian, "hold acquaintance with the waves." Now, who is Arion? Okay, how is this musical? Well, Arion is a figure in Greek mythology, and he was a poet and musician. And in order to escape being robbed and murdered by sailors, he sang, along with playing his lyre, to charm this dolphin that carried him safely ashore. Shakespeare would have known about Arion through Ovid's poem Fasti. So I don't know how much Ovid you guys have read, probably not a lot. It doesn't tend to be something that's taught quite a bit. But when Shakespeare was growing up in grammar school, that means what we would call elementary school, middle school, he would have learned about Ovid. He would have known Ovid extensively. And we know this because many of Shakespeare's plays contain evidence that he used Ovid as a source. So his reference here is actually extremely important, because he's sort of foreshadowing the end of the play when Sebastian actually ends up alive, right? By saying that he's like Arion, right? We know that Arion was saved, and what was he saved by? He was saved by music. And so that is an extremely important thematic point. And I encourage you to go and, again, read the entire quote in the text and also read the footnotes. Footnotes can sometimes be really daunting, but they often contain tons of really interesting information that otherwise you might not know. Okay, so songs in Twelfth Night. Like I said, there's 7 full songs and then 2 songs that are just mentioned or the first line is sung. So I've listed those for you. On purpose, I have not given you detailed information about each tune because all of that research is presented very concisely for you in the 3rd appendix of your edition, so Appendix 3. And so I've given you the page numbers there, and so I think it would also be a really good activity to go through and read about each of these tunes, when they first appeared, what versions do we have, do we know it's the original version or is it just the earliest version that we have. Also, I know that at least from talking to Kirsten, that some of you are musically inclined, which is fantastic because the editors have actually printed the music for these songs in the back of the book. And it seems to be fairly straightforward, something that you could probably sight read or pick out on the piano, even if you're not a very good musician. And so it's worth also taking some time with these tunes and seeing, what do they sound like? Also, take some time with the lyrics. Go back into the text, read these lyrics, see if you can make sense of them, see if they're fitting in thematically with some other things that I've already mentioned or will mention. Now, the first actor to have ever sung these songs was a man named Robert Armin. Armin was hired by the Chamberlain's Men, who was Shakespeare's theatrical company, in 1599, and that is because Will Kemp, who had been the sort of designated fool or clown of the theater company, decided to leave the theater in 1599. So Robert Armin comes in, and Armin himself was known as a good singer, as a ventriloquist, and also was a comic dramatist. And one of the pictures that I've given you on your handout, the picture that's on the left-hand side, is actually a cover page from one of his own comedies that he wrote, and has a caricature of Armin himself on the front, sort of standing like this. And so it's quite likely that he actually performed in his own comedies as well. So he undoubtedly played Feste in the first productions of this play. It was first performed at the Globe Theatre. At this point, the Chamberlain's Men had moved from the Curtain to the Globe Theatre, so we were fairly certain it was performed there February 2nd, 1602. But that wasn't the first performance. We just know it definitely was performed that day because for some reason we have record of that. Someone wrote it down in a diary that we now have. What we can guess, it was probably at the end of sort of its run on the Globe stage, which probably started on January the 6th, so about a month before this performance, which would have been the occasion of Twelfth Night. So Twelfth Night, if you don't know about it, it is a religious festival that's connected to Christmas and the Christian tradition. And so it's 12 days after Christmas, and that is Twelfth Night. And here in the UK, they have certain traditions. There's a cake and like something in the middle when they cut it. And if you're the one that finds the thing in the cake, it's lucky or something like that. So worth also looking that up too as you do some more research on your own. So we know that Armin played Feste. And the exciting part about this is not just like, oh, look at this old man. Yeah, doesn't he look funny? Okay, he played Feste, end of story. No, the exciting part about this is we know that Armin had already established his talents as a singer and as a ventriloquist. And so that means that when Shakespeare was writing this play, if you can sort of take your mind and go back in time and really think about, okay, Shakespeare as a dramatist sitting in a room, right, sitting down to write, he wasn't just coming up with things out of the blue. He was thinking, all right, this is the company I have to work with. These are the actors I have to work with. These are their talents. This is what they're good at. I'm going to create a character for this person. And so that is part of the reason that this is a highly musical play, is Shakespeare was simply going with what he had. Just in the way that you are about to with this whole project. You're going to look around and say, okay, this is what we've got. This is the number of people we have. These are our talents. These are our ideas. And then that flows into a creation. And so we get a glimpse, a really exciting glimpse and a really rare glimpse into Shakespeare's approach as a crafter, as a writer. How did he craft plays? And clearly it was with attention to, almost first and foremost in this case, how would it be rendered on the stage, not how it would be rendered in a book. I love books, but when we think about Shakespeare as a writer, we do need to think about he was thinking about who was going to be on that stage, who was going to be singing these songs. So that also is an extremely exciting part about exploring this music in this play. Armin was a countertenor. I'll stop talking about Armin in a second. I'm really sorry. I get really excited about him. Armin was a countertenor, which is a very high male voice, which some of you probably know. And this actually could have been referenced in O Mistress Mine. If you read the lyrics, part of it is that can sing both high and low. And that would have probably referenced Armin's own voice, right? He has this ability to sing extremely high, higher than some women, almost to sound like a boy, right? And then also he can sing low because he's already a fully developed grown man whose voice has dropped. But as a countertenor, he's still able to really have that beautiful range and falsetto in the top of his voice. It also becomes important when we think about the boys that would have been playing the other parts in this play. So in order for Shakespeare to write a play, and this doesn't have to do with Armin really, but it's important to think about, in order for him to write a play that contains a character like Viola and Olivia, those are huge female roles. Lots of lines, lots of needed emotion and expression. That means he must have had boys in his company at that point who were capable of acting at that level. And it only got better as time went on, because then we start seeing roles like Cleopatra come out. And whew, I don't know if you know about Antony and Cleopatra, but that is a role of a lifetime. So also important to think about that all of the women in this play would have been played by young boys originally, not by women or grown men, likely. Now, enough about Armin, enough about the history of this performance. I'm going to get into a little bit more performance history with you in my next video. I want to talk about the thematic importance of music. And I've sort of outlined three thematic regions that I found within the play, but there are certainly more. This is not sort of the be-all, end-all, or the right answer. There are no right answers to me, at least in theater. Music has a redemptive power, okay, in this play. And we've already talked about this in terms of Arion and Sebastian. It also has this power to be able to soothe heartache, right, for Orsino. And so music is extremely important in terms of what or who is being redeemed or saved in this play. Music also has a connective power, which is really exciting. I actually, in my MA year, looked a little bit at this connective power, looking at how does music bridge the stage world to the audience, right? We talk about a fourth wall sort of existing between the stage and the audience. And I think that music breaks this down. And that was during a time where breaking the fourth wall was not something that people talked about in terms of theater. That was not a concept that had really even been explored. So when we think about music breaking down those barriers, that becomes really important. So Feste songs bridge the space. Action stops. You have to think about when songs are being performed, in a certain degree, action stops. People might be responding to the songs or moving with the songs, dancing, something like that. But there cannot be dialogue typically unless there's just a tune in the background and people speaking over top of it. So it is sort of a pause in action, and so it does sort of speak to audiences slightly differently than things like dialogues or conversations on the stage, which happen within the characters, right? And typically don't involve the audience. The title of this play actually suggests this, not the Twelfth Night part, but the original title of this play was Twelfth Night, comma, or What You Will. And that is actually taking the audience and making them a co-protagonist, okay? It's basically saying to the audience, you can make this play what you want it. You can find your own title. You can find your own meaning in this play. And that's essentially what you're getting to do, which is really, really exciting. And I think that music allows the audience to find their own meaning, especially if we consider the fact that all of these tunes likely would have at least been familiar to audiences because they were not tunes that were written especially for the performance of the play, but they were commonly known tunes that might have been played in other venues or other spaces within daily life in Elizabethan England. So it's really important to think about that, what you will sort of tag at the end of Twelfth Night, and think about what is this play for you? What do you make it? How do you make sense of it? And then apply that to the songs. How do you make sense of this music? How do you make sense of these songs? How do you make sense of even the character of Feste within the dramatic economy of this play, or the dramatic sort of layout of this play? Music also sets a tempo, which I alluded to earlier, right? We have sort of two tempos going on in this play, and we get references to that within the musical language, right? We have some musical language that references really fast songs and some that references really slow songs. And the play is concerned with the passage of time, right? At the very end of this play, right, we have this mention of the whirligig of time, right? You have to remember as well that in Elizabethan England, they didn't measure time the way that we do. There were it wasn't as mathematical as it is now. It wasn't measured in seconds and minutes and hours, right? A lot of times it was an estimate. And so time was an ethereal sort of concept for people, right? What is time? Who controls time? How come things happen sometimes really fast and other things happen really slow? And sometimes when you're in love, things can feel really fast, or they can feel kind of like everything is paused, right? And you're in love. And so those are all things to think about. Time has a really important role in this play in terms of theme. And time relates to music, right? And without music, without beats, without rhythm, we don't have music. And so these musical references tend to sort of nod to this fast-slow opposition that we're going to get throughout this play, right? And think of the double time scheme within the two plots, right? How fast or slow is the plot between Orsino, Viola, Olivia, etc.? How fast or slow is that happening? And then think about the other plot, the plot between Malvolio and Maria, Sir Toby, etc. How is that unfolding? Now, the final thing that I'm going to mention in this video, at least, are things that actually are going to help us in our next lesson, which will be on Thursday, I believe. And that's the types of sound in theater. Now, I'm borrowing these terms from film. These terms really didn't exist until film studies sort of started happening. But when we think about sound in the theater, we can often apply things from the film world as a way of talking about it. So diegetic sound is sound like we've been talking about today. So that's sound whose source is visible on the stage or directly responded to by characters on the stage. So this is sung, performed music, right? Music where characters are dancing in time, in rhythm. Music that a character maybe has requested, like Orsino requesting music. But all of this is happening within the stage world. That means the characters can hear it. Yes, the audience can hear it as well, but it is a part of the world that is being built dramatically on that stage. The opposite of that is non-diegetic music. Non-diegetic music is more of what we'll be talking about a little bit tomorrow. And that means the source of the sound is off the stage. And typically it is not even acknowledged by the actors, and most of the time not even heard by the actors. So if we go back to thinking about this in a filmic sense, that's background music, right? That's your John Williams scores. That's your sounds as the bear is approaching someone in the woods that makes your heart race as you're watching a film, or the sounds that make you cry as a couple is falling in love, right? This is mood music. This establishes an atmosphere. Sometimes it's used to try and manipulate audience emotional response. We want the audience to feel sad here, so we're going to play sad sounding music in a minor key as this person is talking, or as the scene is changing, or whatever. We want someone to feel happy here. We're going to play something happier sounding. We're going to play something in a major key that sounds celebratory or a march. When you think of diegetic music, just think of that background music that you almost don't even recognize when you're watching a film. You just know it makes you feel a certain kind of way in a certain moment. That's what non-diegetic music is. And that's the type of music that would have been used in productions of this play that staged the storm scene. Some productions, it makes it a lot easier to make that happen off stage, right? Because then you don't have to figure out the logistics of how do we make a shipwreck and a storm happen on the stage. But there are quite a few productions, which we'll mention tomorrow, that did stage this storm. And we're going to talk about sort of the dramatic impact of that and what that does musically within this production. Okay, so that's kind of my spiel. I hope that hopefully you learned something. I've left you some questions on the last page of your handout. This isn't school. Don't feel like you need to like answer these and send them to me for a grade, because I'm not going to do that. But these are just leading questions and sort of suggestions of things for you to think about as you continue thinking about this play, working with this play, and deciding creatively what your response to this play is going to be. If you have any further questions about what I asked today, or sort of want to know where can I go to find more information on a certain aspect of what I've discussed, feel free to reach out and ask questions. And I hope you guys are enjoying your experience and your summer, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.